Henri Cole wrote his poem Haiku after visiting a jellyfish exhibit at an aquarium. In the poem, he places himself on the beach in red pajamas, observing and contemplating what he calls the unnatural cycles that have emerged in our world. He jumps between the global and the self, switching between third person and first person, connecting our individual lives to the uncanny and unsettling natural world that we find ourselves in a way that poetry seems best positioned to explore. I'm John Fiege, and this episode of Chrysalis is part of the Chrysalis Poets series. Henri was born in Japan to a French mother and an American father. He is the author of a memoir and 12 books of poetry. His awards are numerous and include the Jackson Prize, the Kingsley Tufts Award, the Rome Prize, the Berlin Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Lenore Marshall Award, a fellowship from the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, and the Award of Merit Medal in Poetry from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He has taught at many colleges and universities, including Smith, Reed, Brandeis, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. He currently teaches at Claremont McKenna College. I spoke to Henri on June 29th, 2022, and we had a horrible international internet connection with a delay. We've edited the conversation so it sounds more natural, but please forgive any remaining moments of awkward pauses and jumps. Here is Henri Cole reading his poem, Haiku.
Haiku. After the sewage flowed into the sea and took the oxygen away, the fishes fled, but the jellies didn't mind. They stayed and ate up the food the fishes left behind. I sat on the beach in my red pajamas and listened to the sparkling foam, like feelings being fustigated. Nearby, a crayfish tugged on a string. In the distance, a man waved. Unnatural cycles seemed to be establishing themselves without regard to our lives. Deep inside, I could feel a needle skip. Autumn dark, murmur of the saw, poor humans.
Great, thank you. Well, let's start with the title, Haiku. The poem is not a haiku, but it seems to end with one. And you transition to the haiku with this line: deep inside, I could feel a needle skip. Autumn dark, murmur of the saw, poor humans. It feels to me like this skip of the needle is an important one, a break, a clash between styles or cultures or voices. It moves from left justification to center lines. It seems to be some kind of transition to a different way to relate to the world. Can you talk about the meaning of haiku to you and in the world of this poem?
Sure. The haiku itself, I think, is not a true haiku because we have syllables 3-5, 3-syllable count, and I think it should be 5-7-5. But that's okay. You might say it's a minimum haiku, if a haiku can be minimum. The poem is actually meant to be a free verse sonnet, and that ends with, my thinking was that in a sonnet, which is usually an octave and a sestet or 3 quatrains and a couplet, there's this thing called the volta, which is a seat of change or a place of transformation in the poem. It's a needle skip, you might say. So in this poem, I was thinking that the skip would go into a whole different genre of poem, to go from a sonnet to a haiku. I was also thinking and remembering of another Japanese form called a haipun. And in the haipun, it's a prose form created by Basho, which he used for some of his travel adventures, where a descriptive a description of landscape very frequently would culminate a a lyric moment of perception. So my poem has the strategy really of a
Mhm.
haiku, though it's blending a sonnet with a haiku. Um, that's a long answer, elaborate answer to your question, but all of it is true.
No, that's great. And with haiku, haven't a lot of more contemporary poets played a lot with that 5/7/5 tempo and played around with things like 3/5/3, but still within the realm of a haiku, kind of moving away from
Yes,
basho?
yes. Maybe I should say that I was born in Japan, and I went back and when I was 45, that's more than 20 years ago, to live for a year. And during that time, I tried to bring to my poems. It was there that I began to write these free verse sonnets. Um, and when I arrived there as a Westerner, I thought it would be a cliched thing to start writing haikus and tankas. I wasn't going to do that. So instead, what I tried to do was to bring to the sonnet form some of the qualities of Japanese poetry, which I loved, like valuing sincerity over artifice, and using images for emblems of inner states. Um, and with a regard to the earth as well, a consideration of the earth. When I was looking at this poem this morning, preparing to talk to you, I was thinking, in a way, it looks like a tree on the page. It has a little trunk and then it has foliage. That pleased me very much. I hadn't thought of that before. Um, but you might say it's top heavy, like a tree.
Very full, a very productive tree.
Yes. I was working recently with a German translator that my book Blizzard is going to be in published next year in Germany. And so he asked me some questions about this poem, which made me think about it in a way I hadn't quite thought about it. One of the things he asked about was the needle skip. He wondered if it was, what kind of a needle was it? An inoculation type needle, or was it a record player? Um, he wondered about the crayfish tugged on a string. Um, what that image was supposed to mean. Um, and I meant it just as I wanted the string to be there as human refuse on the beach. He wanted to know, was the crayfish like a crab? Was it what's the German word for crayfish? I mean, he made me stop and think about the poem in a way I hadn't really in quite some time.
Well, let's jump back to the opening of the poem. You write, after the sewage flowed into the sea and took the oxygen away, the fishes fled, but the jellies didn't mind. They stayed and ate up the food the fishes left behind. Could you talk about your relationship to the sea or the coast and whether the subject of this poem is tied to a specific event or place?
I think I wrote this poem after visiting a jellyfish exhibition at a aquarium, either in Monterey or in Boston. I can't remember where it was. I saw this exhibit. And I was with a friend. So some of that is information I picked up at this exhibition, I think. Um, I mean, the jellyfish were inordinately beautiful, but they were sort of taking over. Um, it must have been in California that I was there. So it wasn't a literal event. I mean, the poem conflates my own events together to become the poem, and one of them was a visit to the aquarium, and where I learned about jellyfish. And then one of them is the experience of, being on the beach in my red pajamas. So, I put them together. I didn't know that about the jellyfish populating and replacing. I didn't know about this cycle, so I wanted it to be the genesis of the poem, you might say, for a reflection about humans and the earth.
So you learned about how jellyfish are displacing fish in this exhibit, and that's what kind of spurred the writing of the poem?
Yes, I think it did. Or it was one of the things when I sat down, one of my experiences that I had some information, I think, from that show. I went looking this morning for the drafts of this poem so I could see exactly. And there were almost no drafts, and that tells me that it was a poem I wrote on the road when I was someplace where I couldn't be printing things out.
So I find these next images, sounds, and feelings to be particularly striking. You write, I sat on the beach in my red pajamas and listened to the sparkling foam, like feelings being fustigated. So even in my mind, your red pajamas stick out like a warning flag on the beach. Instead of listening to the calming sound of the waves breaking or something like that, you're listening to this eerily disturbing sound of sparkling foam, presumably caused by the sewage. And all this beats up on your feelings. What's happening? What's happening with these charged and unsettling images and sounds and feelings in this part of the poem?
Well, I think I was using the sparkling. I mean, I was imagining that this very beautiful um, image was actually a a corrosive one, you might say. I was in the sense that it's like my feelings being fustigated, the feelings of the poem being explored. I wanted it to be both kind of innocent and scary, you might say.
And I love this next phrase. Unnatural cycles seem to be establishing themselves without regard to our lives. What are these unnatural cycles? And why would you expect them to have any regard for anyone's lives?
Well, I was thinking about the cycles of the sea being polluted by humans. There, before that image, you see in the distance a man wave, so another human enters the scene, and then unnatural cycles seem to be establishing themselves without regard to our lives. That's just a kind of statement of fact, isn't it? Um, I think we do sort of egotistically expect there to be regard for our lives, but I think the poem makes clear there isn't.
And some of these unnatural cycles might be pollution or overfishing, warming oceans, coastal development, that all have negative impacts on most fish, but jellyfish often thrive in these with these human impacts on the ocean. How much do these global ecological implications of climate change fit into what you're doing here with the poem?
Well, I think they all do, in a kind of organic way. They're all contributing. I mean, the poem begins with this image of sewage, doesn't it? Which is a human, a human violation. But really, all of those things are. The point is that the natural cycle of the sea is being interrupted.
You switch between first and third persons in the poem. No, it feels to me that the I is a bit of a revelation where, many poems don't have the first person at all. And you could read the first four lines that way. And then I sat comes in. It's these observations that aren't attached to a speaker, and then the speaker comes in. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on how that way of representing this scene plays out within the poem.
I think you're right. I think your perception is a good one. I'm a lyric poet, and that means that my poems present a snapshot of the self in a moment of being. But this poem begins with a kind of global moment. So you might say that rather than looking inward at the self, it's looking outward at the world, and then from there it goes inward. So it has a kind of, I don't know, almost like an umbrella shape. You might say it begins in this kind of larger way and then comes down to a narrow point. Um, so, um, so you're right in what you say. The poem does both things.
What is that experience like to see your own work in different ways at different times in your life?
Well, I think when you're writing a poem, you're in a kind of close focus mode. So you're not thinking, "Gosh, I'm going to begin globally, and then I'm going to go lyric." But
Right.
after the fact, you stand away and you look at it more as a reader than as a writer, and you're my reader, so you're able to see things that I can't. You might say that when you're writing, you're in a kind of microscope mode, and when you're reading, you're sort of more in a satellite mode. So I think what you say is true. Um, and then the really the end is kind of goes global again, you might say, with the haiku.
So let's look at the last three lines again. Autumn
Mhm.
dark, murmur of the saw, poor humans. So for me, considering what comes before this in the poem, it seems you could refer to humans as destructive or foolish, ignorant, thoughtless, greedy, and any number of things, but you end on poor humans. Can you talk a bit about what's going on here at the end?
Well, autumn dark is a sort of a moment in time when the poem is set, I think. Um, and murmur of the saw is meant to refer to the disintegration of the systems, you might say, the environment, the normal systems of the environment that are there being cut by the saw. And poor humans, um, yes, I suppose that is surprising rather than poor Earth. Um, is that why you're asking that?
Well, a little bit. I just feel like, some ways, what you've set up previously in the poem is all these bad things that humans have done, um, but then you feel sorry for them, which I think is understandable. But you could have gone a different direction. So I was just wondering what the emotion is there.
Yes. Well, it's a feeling of empathy for humans. I mean, it is poor humans who can't seem to help themselves.
Right.
Um, Poor humans who don't know better. Poor humans, you know, um, doing the wrong again. Um, Poor humans, of which I am one. I don't want
And
it to seem. I don't want it to seem like I'm placing myself above others.
yeah, I think you are part of this by being on the beach in your red pajamas that stick out so starkly to the blue sky and the brown sand. You're there on the beach um, as an unnatural cycle in itself as well, in some ways. How can poetry allow us to see our ecological relationships in new and different ways, either through reading poetry or writing it?
Well, um, I think poems teach us what we feel, can teach us what we feel, or help us to understand what we think we feel and see in the world. So I don't think of them as, um, I mean, educating is one of the functions of the lyric, but it's not the only one. So, so this poem kind of embodies the moment that is showing the sea in jeopardy, you might see, and without preaching, I wanted it to instruct, I guess, and empathize.
Do you feel sometimes that you yourself are part of the audience for your own poetry in the sense that you will discover something new in reading something that you wrote?
Yes. I mean, actually, reading this poem, it still feels fresh to me. I'm a little surprised that it doesn't feel dead to me. It still feels very alive to me, very, very relevant. That pleases me immensely. Sometimes I do go back to old things, or this is probably, I think I wrote it in 2018, and I don't feel. I feel, gosh, I could fix this, or I should have done this, or this could be better. But actually, I feel like I got this one right. I feel like it's saying exactly what I wanted, and it has this strange counterpoint in it.
I love the counterpoint. It really creates this tension and this contrast that really brings it alive.
Yeah, it's not linear. I hate linearity. I mean, in poetry, um, and that excites me about it still. So that pleases me immensely.
Well, that's great. I read in another interview you did that when you were younger, you used what you said as nature as a mask for writing about private feelings. And then in your mid 40s, as you mentioned earlier, you moved back to Japan where you were born, and you lived this fairly minimalist life in the foothills of Kyoto, connected in many ways to the natural world around you. Can you talk a bit about how your relationship to nature has changed over time in your life and in your poetry?
Well, um, I still feel I'm not a religious person, but I do feel that if there is a God, it is in nature. I do feel that. So that when I'm in nature, when I'm in the middle of a lake swimming, I feel closest to whatever maybe religious people feel. I don't think that's changed. I think I always felt protected by nature and not judged by it so much. I've just been working on a project of translating the fables of Jean de La Fontaine, who is a fable writer, and all of his creatures are almost all of his creatures are animals and insects of the forest, and he uses them to to find insight into human nature, which is mostly a negative insight. That's not exactly what I do. Um, I think I find beauty and solace in nature. I don't quite have a social satire component to my poems in the
Mm,
way that La
mhm.
Fontaine maybe does. I find nature a consolation. Um, so, particularly, um, I think if you write with animals, um, I mean, there's I think it comes from Oscar Wilde, where if you're given a mask, you're willing to speak to the truth of your predicament. And I think if you're writing about animals, you can maybe go farther than if you're writing about humans, though in fact you are writing.
Well, it
So
seems that nature has always been so essential to poetry and, to everything really. I mean, what is not nature? Um, but it feels to me like in your poem, the sewage and the jellyfish and the foam, these are all ominous signs. And in some ways, kind of your ability to find solace in nature is threatened. by these unnatural cycles that you talk about. And I feel that in the poem, that this is a place, this is a world that you find joy and comfort in, and there are all these signs that things aren't as they should be.
Yes, I think that's dead on. That was my hope.
And can you talk about this line, nearby a crayfish tugged on a string?
Yes. Well, that was just meant to be another kind of violation, that the crayfish, rather than digging a hole in the sand, or, that it was involving itself with a string, a piece of refuse on the beach. It's just meant to be another example of human pollution on the beach side. It's not meant to be a positive image. It's pulling the string it has no function for. I mean, it's not supposed to be a fishing line or anything. It was just meant to be a trash.
Yeah, that's almost more insidious than a fishing line.
Yes, it is more insidious in my view.
Well, is there anything else that talking about this poem brings up or brings back or makes you think about?
No, I think we've said a lot about it, more than I ever thought possible. I'm just looking at it on the page. I always think it's good to think about just the way a poem looks on the page. Well, as I say, it looks sort of like a tree to me, a little shrub.
Yeah, I love that you discovered that just having us talk right today. That's great.
Yeah, no, it looks like it's got a little stem at the bottom, and otherwise, thank you for allowing me to think about the poem again.
Yeah, I always find it so valuable to revisit things that we've spent so much time focused on in the past, because when we visit it again, we're a different person in a different place, a different time.
Yes,
Well, can you end by reading the poem once again?
yes. Haiku. After the sewage flowed into the sea and took the oxygen away, the fishes fled, but the jellies didn't mind. They stayed and ate up the food the fishes left behind. I sat on the beach in my red pajamas and listened to the sparkling foam, like feelings being fustigated. Nearby, a crayfish tugged on a string. In the distance, a man waved. Unnatural cycles seemed to be establishing themselves without regard to our lives. Deep inside, I could feel a needle skip. Autumn dark, murmur of the saw. Poor humans.
Great. Henri, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Chrysalis podcast. Please subscribe at johnfiege.earth, where you can also find show notes and all episodes of the podcast, plus my writing, photographs, and films. I want to send a very special thank you to all of our paid subscribers. Your membership allows us to grow, flourish, and remain free and ad-free for everyone. Your belief in the work that we're doing and your generous support mean the world to me and the podcast team. Thank you.